Good evening, good evening. Welcome, welcome. So the other day I was struck by, I was talking with somebody, and this person was convinced about, how the future was going to be. Had this certain amount of certainty. This is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. And I was really struck by, well, how do you know? I think, of course, we can imagine how things are going to be, but, why do you have such a sense of certainty? And this individual had a lot of emotion around it too. So I've just been thinking about this idea of certainty. And then the other day, I had some discomfort on my face. And I thought, oh, it's that tooth. And I made this whole story. My dad, my brother, and I, the three of us, just don't have such good teeth, it comes to find out. And we have all these dental issues. And I had this whole story about, there's this pain, which means, this, which means that, and then this is going to happen, and oh my gosh, And I knew it was a story. I knew I was making it a story. I was making it up, but there was a way that I was kind of like invested in this story. Like, because it means this, then I'm going to have to do that, or, all this kind of stuff. And, because I had this story, I called the dentist, I went to the dentist, and they're like, have you had any problems with your sinuses lately? Those of you in the room here, did you hear me cough? It's not uncommon this time of year. I have some allergies that come up. They're like, it's just sinuses. And I'm like, oh, of course. I had this certainty that it was going to be a certain tooth and this whole story about it. Turns out not to be that way. Today is Veterans Day, November 11th. I guess this holiday started out as Armistice Day, way back when, celebrating the end of World War I. Celebrating that it was the end of the war that was going to end all wars. Yeah. It's maybe the certainty, or maybe with a certain optimism, but there have been wars since World War I. So that, this predicting of the future turns out not to work so well. I mean, sometimes it does. Sometimes it works well. But there's this way in which when we are facing uncertainty, which I'll come to talk about, turns out to be all the time. But we somehow neglect to remember that or aren't tuned into that. But in the face of uncertainty, of things that we're not quite sure about, then we make assumptions. And then based on those assumptions, we make predictions. I'm assuming it's my tooth. Has this same tooth I had problems with, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And then I'm going to predict that something very uncomfortable is going to happen, at the dentist's office or something like this. This is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. This is what humans do. This is partly why we have discursive thinking. This is what our minds and brains are been trained to do in our life, is to make some assumptions and make some predictions. But there's this way in which we are making assumptions so often, in so many ways and in so many places, things that will be similar to how they were before. Is this implicit assumption that maybe underlies so many of our days. We're just thinking like, yeah, it'll be like how it was yesterday in some kind of way. I'm reminded of sometimes when I use this digital assistant, and I sometimes ask, "What's the weather?" And then they'll say, blah blah blah. Later today will be more of the same. Every day it's kind of like later today will be more of the same. It's not. I'm exaggerating. It's not every day, but it's not uncommon for it to be that way here in California. And so there's this way in which we so often are thinking like, oh, tomorrow will be more of the same. The day after that will be more of the same. So there's this way in that we assume that there's this degree of stability, this degree of sameness in our lives. And we're taking for granted the continuity of so many different things. Continuity of our possessions, that our car is going to start in the morning, or that the computer is not going to die in the middle of some critical activity. For the most part, we can rely on these things these days. Continuity of our physical well-being, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking like, oh, I'm going to get in a car accident this afternoon. Like, nobody thinks that, right? I'm going to get a terrible diagnosis. Somebody close to me is going to get a terrible diagnosis. And then, of course, we're making predictions based on this. But what happens when things turn out not the way that we've planned? What happens when things completely unexpected happen? Or when maybe it's not, part of us, it's not so unexpected, where we had some assumptions, we made some predictions, and then those predictions turn out to be wildly inaccurate. Or maybe even just a little bit inaccurate, but just their degree of inaccuracy makes us feel uncomfortable. Oh, why didn't I see that coming? Oh, I should have paid more attention to this thing or that thing or something like this. Because the truth is, I grew up here in California. Those of you who have been here in California a long time know this idea of earthquakes, right? I kind of just really grew up with this idea. Any moment now, there's going to be an earthquake. And when I was in school, we had to hid under our desks. We had these earthquake drills, and there's certain things, I keep a certain amount of water, a certain amount of food at home, certain things that are charged up, for batteries. I don't get down to an empty tank on my car. All this kind of stuff, just because I think, well, there may be an earthquake and I need to prepare. So what do we do? Even though we're prepared, even when we're making predictions that are based on what we think are valid assumptions, and yet something really unexpected happens, or just even mildly unexpected. There's this way in that this noticing that things aren't the way that we were anticipating them to be, sometimes can touch a deeper sense of insecurity, a deeper sense of recognizing we don't control things. We're vulnerable. There's not a safe place, the place that you can be completely 100% safe, guaranteed all the time. That doesn't exist. And we don't like to feel this. We don't like to feel any of these things, the vulnerability or the sense of insecurity or the sense that things are out of control, we can't control them. And so then there's often ways in which we will respond, a myriad of ways. One is that we just feel like, oh, no, I need some certainty. I need something that I can really hold on to and count on, plan with, or, okay, I got to find some certainty. And we'll look to find it in whatever way that we can, or in whatever way makes sense for us. We have this kind of like, we might become fixated on finding, the truth, the absolute truth, because then we can hold on to that. And that won't let us down. Or finding, okay, what's the precise rules? What's okay, what's not okay? And don't give me any of this gray business. I just want to know what's, perfectly gray and perfectly black and perfectly white. There's this way in that we get fixated on trying to like remove all sense of doubt or uncertainty. And it's fascinating how just this looking for this certainty, this wish, like wanting to find this certainty, perpetuates uncertainty. Because more we look and I gotta find this in order to feel okay, and then we won't find it, we won't find it. And this can lead to a spiral of just, wait, this isn't reliable, this isn't reliable. So this is one thing that we might respond by just really like craving some certainty and really trying to find out which spiritual tradition is the best one, is the true one, which teacher is the best, which practice is the best, which meditative experience is the best. We might have this way in which we start looking for these types of things. Or maybe there's this way in that we just start searching for information. When we discover some uncertainty, we might look for just maybe overly relying on opinions or views of other people. Okay, well, surely they must know more than I do. And we might be like seeking validation or guidance from other people, which can be a wise thing to do. But there can be a way in which we are kind of like giving our authority or our own discernment over to other people. Thinking like, okay, well, this person knows, or whatever they say. And this kind of like looking for certainty, we might, just, well, I clearly don't have it. I'm filled with doubt, and I'm not quite sure how things go. So, but this person, they claim that they do, or they look like they do. So I'll just look at them, what they are saying. Or maybe the information, we're just consuming information with the news, social media. Wow, we've created a whole society that is just filled with this. You want information? Here you go. It's astonishing, right? How much information there is. And it's also astonishing how much of it conflicts, right? How much of it, like there's some incompatible views going on, and then this wish for certainty ends up to even having more agitation, looking for information. But then, wait, which one is right? Which one is right? And then that maybe just fuels this sense of insecurity that we often have. I mean, all of us do this to some regards. I mean, probably when we have some new medical symptom, Google, what are the da-da-da-da-da, right? This. And we look up the symptoms, what does it mean? And is it time to go to the doctors? Or what should I do about it? Or something like this. Or maybe there's this way in which we buy into conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories are part of their allure is like, nope, this is the truth. Everything else is wrong. Yeah, just ignore all that other stuff. Maybe it's the same reason why people join cults. This is true and everything else is wrong. This feeling of uncertainty, that vulnerability, insecurity, it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. Some other ways of responding when we feel into this or we experience it, maybe there's just sense of fear. Like, what's going to happen? Like, I don't know. This fear of the unknown. This recognition, like, wait, if I'm not so good at predicting, or if this now, I don't even know what to think about this, there can be some fear that comes up. This is a natural thing, right? Fear of the unknown. But there's this way in which the fear can, if it might lead to agitation or this like a paralysis, like I don't know what to do. People do awful things based out of fear. They do no things. They do nothing out of fear. A lot of avoidance, maybe. Or maybe if things, if we had this sense of way things are going to be and they turn out not to be that way, maybe there's some anger. Like maybe there's even it's not so well thought out necessarily, but a sense of betrayal. But wait, I thought it was going to go this way. And it turns out to go a different direction. And then with this anger over well, we have to blame somebody. Sometimes we blame ourselves. Why didn't I pay attention to the signs? Why didn't I know? Well, it would have turned out the way I thought if only those other people didn't do X, Y, and Z. There's this way in which when this feeling of when things don't turn out the way that we're anticipating, that we often are looking outside of us, looking for information, blaming others, trying to find the answers somewhere out there. The truth is, there really is uncertainty. Right? I mean, there's likelihoods. Of course there is. But there's this way that the human mind often overlooks the inherent uncertainty of life. Inherent uncertainty to just about everything. We're never guaranteed things are going to turn out the way that we plan, we anticipate, that we expect. There's this way that if we had to admit that things are uncertain, they arise due to causes and conditions. But what are all these causes and conditions? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. We don't know all of the reasons why things happen. There's all kinds. This is why, there's people over here will say, well, it happened because of A, B, and C. And then these people are here. No, it happened because of X, Y, and Z. Well, maybe it happened because of LMNOP. But there's a bunch of things that come together to make everything happen. I'm sitting here because I wanted to say I didn't die today. I was supposed to be here. I didn't think I was going to die. I don't know if people usually are thinking that, but I mean, there's so many things here that came together for me to just be here and for you to be here to be listening to a talk. Wow, there wasn't a family emergency that I was required to take care of. I wasn't away at another retreat that I was needed to teach or that I was teaching, or I didn't get in an accident on the way here. All these things that we don't assume are going to happen, but they didn't happen for me to be here, and then for you guys to be here, each one of you individually, and then for the microphone system to work and the lights to work, right? How many of you were here when there wasn't any power, right? That was like a whole different situation here. So we often overlook this inherent uncertainty. And partly the reason why It's uncomfortable. But it's also really highlights how we don't control nearly as much as we think we do. And partly this feeling of things being uncontrollable is uncomfortable. We like to think like, okay, I can make my own destiny. I can make things be a particular way. I can influence outcomes. I can make things happen. We can help create the conditions that changes the likelihood of things happening. Maybe is a way to think about it. But there's no guarantee that there's not something else that's going to arise that we didn't anticipate. And so this idea of unreliability, the Buddha talked about this. He pointed to this as one of the core teachings. And like really understanding this and aligning with it is a way towards greater peace and ease and freedom. So the Buddha talked about how things are changing, anicca, inconstant, impermanent. And sometimes we hear this and we think like, oh, yeah, of course, right? It's fall now, the leaves are falling from the trees, things change. It wasn't fall a few months ago. The leaves were a different color a few months ago. And we just feel like, okay, yeah, that's a change. But just pointing how everything is actually changing. There isn't anything that's like inert completely in the sense that it will, until the end of time, be the same. The time frame on the which ways things are changing is different, but everything is changing. And partly, like, we are changing too. All of us have heard, about how many cells you have in the body and they change every 7 years. I don't know if this is true or not. But our minds are changing. We're learning things every day. We're making assumptions, and our assumptions are supporting some predictions that we're making. So even if the bell seems like it's exactly the same, but the person who's ringing the bell is maybe a little bit different. And I learned from maybe at a retreat center I was teaching at recently how delicate one needs to be with the striker. So now maybe the experience of the bell isn't exactly the same because I'm a little bit different and now I'm striking it a little bit different. But the bell, you might say, but it looks the same. But is only the way that something looks, is that everything about the bell? Maybe it's also sounds. Maybe it'll sound different. I'm just making this up. Just things change. But that was only one of the characteristics, right, that the Buddha talked about. There's 3 characteristics. One is the changing nature. And then following from that is dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature. Because things can't be reliably predicted upon, there's a sense of uneasiness that goes with this. There's nothing that is not changing. Changing is the constant, we might say. So there can't be this source of reliable happiness in the way that we are looking for it, in the way that we are expecting it. And then, as I was saying, the part of it means that we can't control it. We can't control ourselves. We can't stop the aging. We can't stop getting sinus issues. We can't stop, illnesses. They arise even though we might be doing our best to protect ourselves. And this kind of like lack of control, like the fact that we can't completely control this human experience, the Buddha pointed to this too. And it's partly what he's talking about, a self. He's saying, if there were a self, the way that it was being defined at this time in ancient India, and partly how we can understand it in contemporary times, then a self would be something that we could control. If it's actually yours, you could control it. That's part of the definition of something that you own, that you have, you own, is you can control it. And well, we don't completely control this self. How many times have you had thoughts that you didn't want to have or expecting to have? Emotions that you didn't want to have, or this, as I said, this body, right? These bodies, they're doing their own thing. So what do we do about this? And I'll say this is partly why we have spiritual practices, really, is to help us to be with some of these difficulties, with this feeling of insecurity, this feeling of uncontrollability, this feeling of vulnerability. Part of this spiritual practice is to recognize difficulties. Yeah, this is uncomfortable. Not to repress it, not to deny it, not to gaslight ourselves. I love this expression, gaslight ourselves. Try to pretend like, oh, no, that's nothing. But instead, no, to say, no, yeah, this, ouch, I don't like this at all. And part of a spiritual practice is to be able to see clearly, to see, okay, this actually is the reality, and to be able to meet it and hold it in a way that makes one's life fuller, makes one's life richer, makes brings some beauty and grace to one's life, as opposed to collapsing or trying to make something different, something completely different. So part of a spiritual practice is so we can have a mature response to when we're noticing that, oh yeah, this didn't turn out the way that I thought it was going to. Can we have a mature response that says it didn't turn out the way that it didn't want to, and not to collapse, but then not to also go the opposite way and say, well, everything's uncontrollable and unpredictable, therefore I'm not going to bother wearing a seatbelt or a helmet or or exercise and eat well and all these types of things that we do to try to protect ourselves. We could say, well, we don't know what's going to happen. So why should I even bother to do things that might provide some safety? So a mature response is to recognize we don't actually know. So we plan and recognize we don't know it's going to work out that way. We take precautions and recognize we don't know, it's not a guarantee it's going to protect us. So there's this way, this kind of aligning ourselves with this truth of impermanence, the truth of uncertainty, is a way that actually provides this security. It's not by finding that one thing that we can just hold on to and like, okay, great, I found it. I don't have to search anymore. But instead, just to recognize, yeah, things are always changing. And so it's about our relationship to that. Can we hold our expectations lightly? Can we still make them and recognize them as expectations, recognize them as predictions based on assumptions, and those assumptions may or may not be true? but just to hold them lightly. And then let go of all these attempts to try to control things that actually we can't control. Letting go of trying to control other people. Have you tried it? Did it work? Do you like it when people try to control you? I don't. I don't like it. I'm just going to say it. I really don't like it when people are trying to control me. I have this little inner rebellious person that inside here that just roars when there's some of that kind of thing trying to happen. So how do we work with this uncertainty? Align ourselves with the truth of impermanence. I'm going to use this word truth. I'm holding it lightly. Let go of the attempts to control things that are beyond our control. And then one thing that will support us in doing this is just a mindfulness practice. Just to be present for our lives. Just to be present for recognizing that the stories that we're making, the fabrications that we're doing about the future, they're 100% fabricated. They're not based out of nothing, most likely, but just to recognize, oh yeah, this is a story I'm making up about this pain, what it means. So notice, mindfulness practice also helps us to notice just the changing nature of things. For those of you who are familiar with the Satipatthana Sutta, this is the key text in the Buddhist literature that points to a mindfulness practice. And there's this refrain that gets repeated like 13 times. And it talks about noticing impermanence, noticing the changing nature of things. And this can be a real practice that can be really beneficial. Just to notice how things are fluid. They're not constant. And there's this way in which when we notice that, then there's just this natural kind of like loosening of the grip that we have on things, on how we expect things to be or how we want to be. Maybe this mindfulness will also help us this way in which we're kind of like often, maybe in a subtle way, wrestling with our experience. Like, no, it should be this other way. I predicted it to be this way. I want it to be this way. And there's this way that we're pushing with experience and trying to morph it into something the way that we think it should be. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make changes, but it starts with just recognizing, okay, here's the truth of the moment. Here's the reality. Here's how I'm responding to it. I don't like it. I want it to be different. And then starting from there, then go what the next thing is. But often we don't even notice how much we're trying to push and pull against our experience, how much we're trying to make it be different. So we can practice some mindfulness that can help us to notice the changing nature of things and notice how much we're trying to control. And then I would say also to nourish our inner lives. There's this way in which, it's so much easier to have some stability and some maybe uprightness, or I'm using uprightness figuratively, like to be able to sit upright instead of collapsing, maybe is what highlight. It's the opposite of collapsing when something unexpected and unwanted happens. It's so much easier to do that if we are nourishing our inner lives. And what do I mean by that? To do something that feeds the heart. Being in nature. Looking at beauty. For some of you, maybe it's meaningful to have a devotional practice, something where there's or maybe it's simple as lighting a candle before you meditate. Or maybe some of you have an altar with things that are meaningful for you. Or maybe some of you have a chanting practice. Or maybe just singing or dancing or some of these things. So there's so much, it's so much easier to meet difficulties if there's a part of us that feels nourished. And sometimes when we're feeling this insecurity and things aren't quite right, we're to go looking for information, as I was talking about. Information can help a little bit, but I'm pointing to also these other ways. For me, I love to be hiking with redwood trees. Every time, a few times a week, I'm out there as much as I can. And if I'm hiking with somebody else, I can't help it. I'm always saying like, wow, it's so great to be here. I just feel so lucky to be living in the Bay Area. We have these amazing redwood trees that, I don't know, for me, that I just feel nourished and supported by them. And then there's this way that I also want to highlight that this uncertainty brings promise and beauty also. I was talking about how it can be a bummer if you're expecting one thing and then something different shows up. But there's this way that poetry and art, the ones that are like really touch us, in my view, I have like this combination of the familiar and yet a little extra something that's unexpected that brings a little bit of delight. Or maybe there's this way that there's a sense of freshness if we are tuning into this sense of, yeah, things aren't as predictable. And this freshness like brings a certain aliveness to our life. Maybe there's a way in which we would have some curiosity about, oh, I'm not quite sure what the day is going to bring. I have this idea that it's going to have A, B, and C, but I'm not quite sure. And to be like engaged with your life, instead of like, A, B, and C, here we go. Which is easy to do, right? It's easy to do that. So there's this way that this uncertainty brings some of this promise and beauty also. And then maybe I will end with this poem. This poem is called Never the Same by Rosemary Trommer. Never the Same by Rosemary Trommer. Sometimes a person wakes believing they are a storm. It's hard to deny it, what with all the rain pouring out of the gutters of the mind, all the gusts blowing through, all the squalls, all the gray. But by afternoon, it seems obvious they are a garden about to sprout. By night, it is clear they are a moon, luminous, radiant, faithful. That's the danger, I suppose, of believing any frame. Let me believe then in curiosity, in wonder, in change. Let me trust how essential it is to stumble into the trough of the unknown. Marvel how trough becomes wings, becomes faith, becomes math. Let me trust uncertainty is a sacred path. I'll read this again. Sometimes a person wakes believing they are a storm. It's hard to deny it, what with all the rain pouring out of the gutters of the mind, all the gusts blowing through, all the squalls, all the gray. But by afternoon, it seems obvious they are a garden about to sprout. By night, it is clear they are a moon, luminous, radiant, faithful. That's the danger, I suppose, of believing any frame. Let me believe then in curiosity, in wonder, in change. Let me trust how essential it is to stumble into the trough of the unknown, marvel how trough becomes wings, becomes faith, becomes math. Let me trust uncertainty is a sacred path. I love this notion of the stumble into the trough of the unknown, and then marvel how trough becomes wings. Things are unfolding, this changing business, this unpredictability. We aren't, when we're in the trough, we're not expecting them to become wings. But they do. Things like change, and then they become known, and then she says, trough becomes wings, becomes faith, becomes math. For me, I'm interpreting math as, like, oh yeah, okay, now we can make predictions based on this. The likelihood is, the probability, those of you who took statistics, like we could just turn it into a probability problem or something like this. Because it becomes known, and it becomes something from which we can build upon in our life. So maybe we could think about this idea of moving from predictions about how things are going to be to presence, to being how things are now. And part of the way that they are now is uncertain. And with that, I'll open it up to see if there's some questions or comments. Thank you.
I was thinking about uncertainty for me, and I feel like in certain parts of my life, I really like uncertainty, and those are probably things I enjoy doing, but I kind of love that I'm cooking without a recipe and I don't know how it's going to taste, or I'm dancing with this band I've never heard before, and I like that. So I was thinking maybe I can think about that, and then the areas of uncertainty that I don't like, maybe that will help me, loosen up a bit about it. I already, I have kind of a thing about parking in San Francisco. So I know I have a problem with this. Why am I anxious? It always works out somehow. But I'm just thinking maybe if I can, I don't know, kind of think about how areas of my life where I'm really totally comfortable with uncertainty, and then I don't know if I can open up more in those areas where I don't like the uncertainty.
Yeah, I was struck by, you made this a small little comment about parking in San Francisco. Well, it seems to always work out.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, I think, to notice, oh yeah, things often aren't turning out the way that we planned or expected, but they did turn out in some other way, whether we liked it or not. So that things are always unfolding, and then we work with them, and or not. If we don't work with them, then we're stuck and filled with anger or something like this. But just this recognition that things are like always. I don't know, now that I say this, maybe it sounds silly, but things are always unfolding, and there's this way, can we just trust that what's going to happen next is going to happen next, whether we are like it or don't like it, and is there a way that we can have some confidence? And so maybe part of how we gain that confidence is just by noticing, oh yeah, things are always changing. They're not as in a way that we expect. But I like what you said about, oh yeah, other places it's fine. Cooking, dancing, I like it. Parking, not so much. Thank you. I think this is the end of our time here, so thank you for your kind attention, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you.